Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final lecture here in Chapter 17 on the Renaissance and the Reformation. In this lecture, we're going to look at the continuation of the Reformation from where it started in Germany under Martin Luther, and now we're going to see how the rest of this movement affects other places in Europe and how it changes Christianity as a whole. All right, so the first person we have to talk about when we transition from the Reformation, from the role that Martin Luther had in it, is John Calvin. Now, as the Reformation and Protestantism spreads, John Calvin's going to be very instrumental in keeping that to spread and allowing it to, or helping it to spread across Europe. Now, one thing he does is in 1536, he publishes a book known as the Institutes of the Christian Religion. And basically, it's just a summary of the Protestant beliefs and practices that you should undertake. And kind of talks about how it's a little bit different than regular Catholicism. Now, he viewed that both men and women are inherently sinful by our actual natures. So therefore, because we're inherently sinful, then he believed, and this is the key thing you need to know about John Calvin, he believed in predestination. Basically, God already knew if you were going to be going to heaven or going to hell before you were even born. You were predestined or elected to be saved before you were born. So it didn't really matter what you did on the earth service in your life. And these teachings kind of melded into a different form of Protestantism known as Calvinism. All right, so now Calvinism is going to spread. Now, under John Calvin, he believed that the ideal form of government is a theocracy, so a religious ruled government. And he actually flees France, and when he flees France, he goes to Geneva in Switzerland, and he rules Geneva as his so-called model city in the 1540s. And it's very strict with brutal punishments. People couldn't wear any bright clothing. There were no card games because that was inherently sinful because of gambling, and people had to go to religious classes at all ages. And if you broke the law, which was very strict, then you were going to be brutally punished and tortured in a lot of cases. Now, John Knox, who is a Scotsman, is someone that's actually going to follow Calvin's teachings, and he's going to be obviously up in Scotland. He's going to learn of the moves and positions of Calvinism, and his group in Scotland are going to be known as the Presbyterians. And then you're going to see Calvinism spread to other places throughout Europe, and they're all going to go by different names. So, for example, in France, the Calvinists are known as Huguenots, and there's actually going to be a religious conflict is going to develop between these two groups in France, the Catholics versus the Huguenots, where the Catholics are going to kill thousands of them. They're going to be persecuted by the Catholics in France. Now we're going to talk about the Anabaptists. Now, you have to remember the Protestants believed that the Bible was the source of all religious truth, not what religious figures on earth said, but the Bible itself. And they believed that the baptized only those that were old enough to decide. Sorry, there's a word missing there, but you only could baptize those that were old enough to make the decision to be baptized. Now, Anabaptists believe that the church and state should be separate, so government was separate from the religion, and Anabaptists refuse to fight in wars or share their possessions. They are the precursors to the Mennonites and the Amish, and they also end up influencing Baptists and Quakers in their kind of positions of, not fighting in wars, not drinking alcohol, and so forth. And they're going to be persecuted both by Catholics and Protestants because of their positions of basically kind of staying out of society and trying to live a moral life. And they're going to be persecuted for basically being peaceful people. All right, so now we're going to talk about women just a little bit. We have to go back a little bit to the Renaissance, because remember we talked about during the Renaissance, even though it was limited more so with women than men, you see people gaining positions, in improving their life, gaining an education. But women start to get a little bit more influence from the Renaissance, and then the Reformation actually ends up helping that. In many cases, as you know, these religious reformers of the Reformation, such as John Calvin or even, you know, um, Martin Luther, women play a role in helping protect these men um, in a lot of ways, such as Marguerite of Navarre. She actually saves John Calvin when he has to flee France, and so forth. Katharina von Bora, who is Luther's wife, is kind of plays a role as well in what women should play in society. She does everything. She supports her husband, she cooks the meals, kind of mothers the children, manages the finances, and she pushes for women to have an equal role in their marriage, which is really instrumental in a lot of ways, probably more important in an everyday life situation for women is what she's advocating, because that's going to be more likely to affect you on a daily basis. And this is, for all intents and purposes, the purposes of, or the the ideas that Von Bora is pushing is the beginning of the modern woman. Okay, it looks a lot different than what we could share compared to today, but it's at least the beginning stages of it. All right, now we're going to go on to Catholic reforms. We'll do a little bit more with this in terms of watching a crash course and discussing what is going to come out of the Catholic Church in terms of the Counter Reformation here moving forward. But even though we're talking about all these changes within Christianity, there's still millions of people that stay faithfully allied in following the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church isn't completely oblivious to this. I mean, there's been wars fought in Germany, and there's, trying to return them, the Protestants and all that kind of stuff. They realize that they actually have to reform as well. And this is going to lead to either what's known as the Counter Reformation or the Catholic Reformation. And one important part of this Reformation is St. Ignatius of Loyola. He's a reformer from Spain, and he actually publishes a bunch of work, in particular here, the spiritual exercises, where he talks about prayer and study and meditation on a daily basis. But really, the big important thing here is the Catholic Church creates the Society of Jesus, or what we know as Jesuits. And they use the Jesuits as this kind of force to go around not only Europe, but eventually to all over the world, because we're going to be leading into the age of exploration here. We're actually in it, in the middle of this during the Reformation. And you see schools that are founded throughout Europe to teach the Catholic faith. You see them trying to convert non-believers, whether it's in Europe or North Africa or the Middle East or as far away as China. And there's also a goal with the Jesuits to stop Protestantism. And we actually see kind of some vestiges of this Jesuit idea here in the United States. If you look at some of the universities here in this country, like Boston College, they're a Jesuit college, and it's because of the starting of this that you have that. So they are doing some reforms in the Catholic Church, and you have a couple of popes that do a lot as well. You see Pope Paul III, he investigates the indulgences and those practices and any abuses, particular in the church and their use of money in taxes and so forth. He is the one that actually approves the Jesuit order to really strengthen the church and strengthen the faith. He uses the Inquisition. Now, this is more of a negative because they, put a lot of people on forced trials, and there's torture and there's death. But he uses the Inquisition to seek out heresy against the church. And he even calls on the Council of Trent, which we're going to talk a little bit about here next. Now, Pope Paul IV also does a lot in terms of reforming for the church. He does carry out the Council of Trent's decrees, but like I said, we're going to talk about that on the next slide. He goes a little bit farther and draws up a burn list in terms of dangerous books to the faith, and burns these books. This is actually a common practice throughout history when people are afraid or institutions are afraid of new ideas. They typically burn literature. Whether you look at here in terms of the comparisons of the Catholic Church and Pope Paul IV or the Nazis in the 30s, that you can see a comparison there. All right, so here's the Council of Trent. You guys need to know what this is and what they agreed upon. So basically, start this slide, highlight it, keep it in memory. So the Council of Trent is actually not one in event. It's actually a name for a series of established doctrines and discussions within the Catholic Church over a 18-year period. So from 1545 to 1563, the Council of Trent is this meeting place to actually change things. And they agree on several things within the Catholic Church that need to change. One, they agree that the church's interpretation of the Bible was final, not some individual person like Luther. The church's interpretation of it. Still, the Bible is the actual book of faith and where you should follow, but it's their interpretation, not some individuals. They believe that salvation, so your ability to achieve a place in heaven, is done through your faith of the religion, but also through doing good things, leading a moral life, helping people out. Then you have the Bible, and the traditions are what are there to guide Christian life. So basically use the Bible and any traditions within the church that are accepted to actually guide your life and to achieve salvation. And they do agree that indulgences can be valid, but they have to be used under truthful pretenses. So like you can't just tell somebody, hey, you can get into heaven if you just give me some money. There has to be some kind of actual reason for them to actually give money and a reward for it. But these are what are agreed on the Council of Trent. All right, and then here I want you to start this slide. This is the legacy of the Reformation, and just like we saw at the end of the second lecture in this chapter, this is for everything within the Reformation. Whereas in the one in the last of part of section 2 was everything for the Renaissance. Same thing here. What are the effects of the Reformation? We see from a religious and societal standpoint, we see the Protestant church be formed, or Lutheran church be formed and flourish across Europe. We see other denominations that actually spread out, like the Calvinists, Presbyterians, Baptists, Mennonites, eventually and so forth. We start to see actually the Catholic Church, even though you have these different denominations and sects break away, they actually emerged stronger religiously because they have to reform. And because of these changes, we actually see more of an emphasis on education because people have to learn the differences of the faith and hunker down within their religion. We actually end up starting to see colleges and universities that are built up and established for this purpose from a religious standpoint. The first universities are going to be built off of these ideas. And we see women are actually going to be, even though they're going to be limited mostly in their concerns to the home and the family, they're going to develop newer roles and more of an equal playing field in their marriage. And it's a small advance for them, but it's a beginning of something that's going to start that process for women to gain equality. All right. The next is political effects. We see Catholic political authority ends up declining because you have religious backing or political backing of different denominations, and that kind of hurts them politically. We do see more power for individual monarchs and states, which is really important because now that means that the modern nation state can actually take off. So like think of like France and Great Britain and so forth, like we think of today or in history. Where do they really start to become this modern state that we think of? It's here. And in the 1600s, we start to see power being sought by these nation states through war, exploration, and expansion. Now, the exploration part is actually already happening in the years before the Reformation, but it expands out of it. And then perhaps most importantly, from a political standpoint, all of these ideas, when you combine them with the Renaissance, the Reformation together, you're seeing the groundwork for the Enlightenment and what's going to ultimately establish the new republics in later on in history, such as the United States and France and so forth. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. I'll see you in the next one.